we have John Adell to introduce our program. John Adell is your program chair this year.
We got in touch a couple of months ago, and I learned a lot about what Adam has done with OpenTheBooks.com. The Open the Books Foundation, he founded that. He's now chair and CEO of that. And its mission is to record every dime of government expenditure in the United States and make it available to you online. Even better, there's an app for it, right? So he has played a key role, and his foundation has played a key role in what's called the transparency revolution. You all are probably tired of me saying we're in the middle of a revolution. We are, and part of it is the transparency revolution. So it's wonderful stuff to learn about. He's a great guy. He graduated from Northern Illinois. He lives in the Chicago area. He's got a wife and 3 daughters. We commiserated about raising a girl. And so he's a good guy, and he's been on everything. The reason that I made the effort to get in touch with him was, as I was researching it, I came across a video on YouTube of Brian Lamb of C-SPAN, right? I would hate to play poker with Brian Lamb. I mean, that guy just sits there. Anyway, he did an hour with Brian Lamb, and it was amazing. It really was. He's been interviewed by the Wall Street Journal, you name it, Fox News, CBS, so on and so forth. And his group, he has an honorary co-chair who is the retired senator from Oklahoma, Tom Coburn. And the two of them put a full-page ad a couple of weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal, and then last week in USA Today, making it one more time an appeal to the president to address the issue of government waste. And he's going to fill you guys in on all of that. It's a real honor for me to introduce. He came to us from Chicago at his own expense. He believes in what he's doing, and I think you will after you hear him. Let's give a big Rotary welcome to Adam Andrzejewski.
John, thank you very much. Outstanding. So what is it with the 4-letter last names here at the Phoenix Rotary 100 with John Adell and Long and Secretary King? Andrzejewski has 12 letters. Thank you for leadership, directors, members. Thank you for extending the invitation. It is a privilege today to share our mission and vision at OpenTheBooks.com. As John so eloquently pointed out, I'm from Illinois, the Super Bowl of corruption. In Illinois, our #1 manufactured product is corruption. You've probably heard of our governors. 4 out of the last 9 of them have spent time in prison. Did a little research here today. In 2012, we had 2 governors, 1 Republican, George Ryan, and 1 Democrat, Rod Blagojevich, in the federal penitentiary at the same time. And it's getting worse. Right now, the Republican governor, Bruce Rauner, is being investigated by the Democratic Attorney General on a criminal basis for the 12 veterans' deaths in the veterans' home in Quincy. And the Democratic challenger, J.B. Pritzker, there was just a Cook County, yes, that's the county of Chicago, a Cook County Inspector General's report that named J.B. Pritzker complicit in a conspiracy to defraud the county of $330,000 worth of property taxes. So we actually could hit a new low with the, Pritzker's probably going to win the election, and he could be indicted before he actually even takes office as governor. We have big cities. In Chicago, obviously, the mayor right now is Mayor Rahm Emanuel. And in 2011, you probably remember when Rahm ran for election, he promised to end pay-to-play in City Hall. He promised to end the historic culture of corruption in City Hall. He signed an executive order after he won for office banning pay-to-play. If you give Rahm Emanuel campaign cash, you couldn't get a city contract. Contractors were barred from campaign donations. So I remember sitting at my desk in 2015 when John Stossel, the Emmy Award-winning journalist at the Fox News Channel in New York City, he called me on the phone and he said, "Adam, can you fact-check Emanuel?" And I said, yes, we can. We were holding 12 years worth of city spending. We mashed it up with his campaign donor disclosures, and here's what we found. We found 600 city vendors gave Rahm Emanuel $7 million of campaign cash, and they had reaped $2 billion in city payments. And it showed us two things. Emanuel was firmly in command of the Mayor Daley political machine, and the second thing that it showed us was that pay-to-play was still entirely legal in the city of Chicago. In my own backyard, rock-ribbed Republican DuPage County, starting in 2014, I kicked off an oversight investigation of my local junior college, the College of DuPage. It's the second largest college in Illinois, 26,000 students. They had claimed they were transparent with every dime of spending. So we fact-checked them, and we found over a 6-year period, they hid $100 million in spending by using an impressed petty cash style of accounting. What could be in $100 million? Well, when the president of the school went to Botswana, Africa, and slaughtered an African elephant, taxpayers paid through that fund for his global satellite phones. We paid for his country club dues, which wasn't in his contract. We paid $250,000 of wine and wine accessories coded as instructional supplies. The chief radio station engineer, unbeknownst to the school's accounting department, opened up his own company and traded with himself to the tune of $500,000. When we pushed this to the Chicago Tribune, it made the front page twice. Then he was indicted. Then he pled guilty and is serving a 9-year sentence in prison today and had to pay back $400,000. But we didn't stop. We found an email strategy from the president of the school to the board outlining how they would bring the incumbent governor political support in exchange for a commencement address and a $20 million state construction grant. And when we unearthed that strategy, we stopped that grant. We weren't finished. We found that in a 7-year period, the school spent $600 million rebuilding every building on campus. But we found they built more office space for the college executives than classroom space for the students. They built an upscale French restaurant complete with a world-class wine cellar and hired a French sommelier. And then they billed off up to $300,000 against the student tuition fund, against taxpayers, against the student scholarship fund, fine dining for themselves in that restaurant with steaks and creme brulee and champagne and wine. Eventually, the president of the school, the treasurer of the school, the comptroller of the school, they were fired, a new board was elected, they cut property taxes, they cut student tuition, and that's the power of transparency. Despite all of this, and living in Illinois, I am hopeful and optimistic about our future. Why? Because this is a unique moment in the last 5,000 years of human history. We are the first nation to recognize that the citizen is sovereign, that our rights don't come from government, they come from God. You and I, with a lot of successful people here in the room today, you and I understand what that means. It means that we get to live the American dream. And you have lived your version of it. And here's my story. I grew up a long way from the city of Chicago, about 100 miles south in a rural community, 1,200 people. And I grew up walking beans to tasseling corn and baling hay. I went to the state school. And then in 1997, my brother and I, we co-founded from our apartments from scratch a publishing company. And here's the story. At the end of the first year, everything we had saved to that moment, we were upside down. We were upside down about $100,000. In year 3, we should have been celebrating by hitting a sales milestone. We had $1 million worth of sales, but that was the year we nearly lost the business because, as you know, when you grow, you pay everything forward. You get paid last, if at all. During that growth phase, we almost lost the business. By year 6, we were a $5 million company. And up through 5 years, every one of our employees out-earned my brother and I. We'd make a little bit, and then my brother would call me with what's known as a capital call. And you know what that is. And the money goes back into the business. At year 6, at $5 million of revenue, to year 10 at $20 million worth of revenue, we were an overnight success. And that's the story of the American dream. But for another dime's worth of taxes, regulations, or fees, we would have been crushed in year 3. So I have dedicated my life that if government is going to take a piece of our freedom, of our family's sacrifice, they owe it to us to spend our tax dollars honestly, frugally, honestly, and efficiently. I am hopeful and optimistic about our future. Because in America, the citizen is sovereign. And our founders recognized this. They recognized the power of knowledge. They wrote it into the Constitution. They recognized the power of transparency. It's Article 1, Section 9 of the United States Constitution, and it states that a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. And today it's the internet age. There's a clear interpretation. Post every dime online in real time, open the books. And my name is Adam Andrzejewski, and I founded OpenTheBooks.com on the clear mission to capture and post online every dime taxed and spent at every level of government across the entire country to empower people to hold the politicians accountable for tax and spend decisions. And we've had a lot of success at Open the Books capturing government spending. We have built the world's largest private database of public spending. Here's what it's comprised of. All the way back to 2001, at the federal level, we've captured all disclosed spending. Amongst federal employees, we've captured all the way from 2007 forward salaries and bonuses. Within our state capitals, in 48 out of 50 states, we have 10 years worth of state checkbook spending. And in 60,000 local and municipal levels of government and public bodies across the country, we file a Freedom of Information Act with those 60,000 units, and we've captured 20 million public employees' salary and pension records. Our honorary chairman is the former U.S. Senator Dr. Tom Coburn. We are carrying forth Coburn's model of transparency. Think about Coburn. He reached across the aisle and partnered with then Illinois U.S. Senator Barack Obama, and they co-sponsored the legislation for the first time in our nation's history that opened the federal checkbook to sunshine. Coburn used the Senate rules. His colleagues called him Dr. No because he stopped up to 1,000 pork barrel expenditure projects from his colleagues in the United States Senate by using the Senate rules to stop them. And what he couldn't stop, he embarrassed them. He published the pork barrel spending in his annual waste book report. Coburn was a small state senator from Oklahoma. But by 2013, he made the Time 100 most influential people in the world list. We are harnessing 3 powerful forces in the internet age: the power of the Freedom of Information Act, the power of big data technologies, and you can download our free app, Open the Books, for Apple and Android, and you can see all of this spending right from the palm of your hand on your mobile device. And we are harnessing the power of forensic auditing techniques to not only open the books, but audit the books and root out waste, fraud, corruption, and taxpayer abuse. We believe that the open government movement is revolutionizing United States public policy and politics. It even works in red states like Wyoming. In Wyoming, the state auditor, Cynthia Cloud, who is Cynthia Cloud? She's a powerful politician. She had won re-election twice with 92% of the vote. That's what Vladimir Putin gets. She had rejected for 4 years our Freedom of Information Act request for the state checkbook. So this year we sued her. And it's been successful. We already have a year's worth of spending, and soon we'll have 5 years worth of spending. And she decided not to run this November. Her model even works in blue states like Oregon. In Oregon in 2016, Brad Avakian, and you know Brad Avakian, he was the state regulator who regulated the wedding cake baker in the bankruptcy. And Brad Avakian was trying to run for the second most powerful position in the state of Oregon, Secretary of State, second in line to the governor of Oregon. And we received a tip that he was using his state agency resources and employees on his campaign. We researched it, and I'm a contributor at Forbes, and we built out a troubling pattern at Forbes where he did use his state agency resources on his campaign. Although we don't have subpoena power, we just laid out the pattern. Well, the largest newspaper in Oregon reached out to Avakian's campaign, and they admitted it. They said, yes, we do. But they make up the time later. And even in Oregon, that is not legal. And Brad Avakian is the first Democrat to lose statewide since the year 2000. We believe that the open government movement is revolutionizing United States public policy and politics. And there is a lot of work to do. But our model even works at the largest federal agencies like Veterans Affairs. And all of us have a stake in this story, because what quite possibly will be the largest scandal ever to break in our lifetime broke in your backyard. And we played a big role in that scandal in 2014. You see, we had already captured the entire VA payroll all the way back to the year 2007 on salaries and bonuses. And we were the ones that knew that the director of that facility, Sharon Hellman, had collected in 2014 a $9,300 bonus, which was 2 times larger than anybody else at the facility, and there was 3,150 people employed at that facility. And we worked very closely with the Arizona Republican, USA Today reporters as we followed that scandal, first in Phoenix, then across the country. And you remember that at the nexus of the scandal, sick veterans couldn't get in to see a doctor because there weren't enough doctors, and the VA claimed a lack of budget. We were cited as one of the forces when the U.S. House of Representatives voted 427 to nothing to end the practice of doling out bonuses at the VA. The Senate never took up the legislation. We've kept on the VA. We've audited their checkbook every year since. In the summer of 2016, here's what we found. We found that the VA spent $20 million on a high-end luxury art portfolio. It was 27-foot Christmas trees costing $21,000. It was sculptures priced like 5-bedroom homes. 2 sculptures at a Palo Alto VA facility that serves blind veterans cost the American taxpayer $700,000. Our findings rocketed to ABC Good Morning America. The Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley picked it up, wrote a 3-page oversight letter to then VA Secretary Robert McDonald. And within 34 days, McDonald apologized for the purchases and instituted new rules to stop the practice on a go-forward basis. But we have a lot of work to do at the VA. You see, Congress has showered the VA with tens of billions of dollars worth of additional funding. And we have fact-checked what the VA has done with that. According to the data at openthebooks.com, the VA has added 60,000 new positions to payroll. So how many doctors? 5,600. How does that play out right here at the Carl T. Hayden VA Center in Phoenix? Well, I took a look this morning from my hotel room at our website. Since 2014, the VA facility right here has added 1,000 new positions. So how many were doctors? 50. Back in 2014, the VA Center had 3,150 employees and 226 doctors. Sick veterans couldn't get in to see a doctor because there weren't enough doctors. And they've added 50 doctors since, but 1,000 positions. So you and I, we have a lot of work to do. At openthebooks.com, we give oversight to tranches of federal spending. And John alluded to our open letter to President Trump, calling for the president as the commander-in-chief to wage a war on waste in a 3-pronged process. First, post all White House expenditures in as real time as possible. Leaders have to lead. Cut federal agency waste. And the third one is report the progress to the American people, show the American people where you are defending the American taxpayer, where you are cutting waste, fraud, corruption, and taxpayer abuse. And we, on the reporting, encourage the president to use Twitter. We also detailed 100 examples of federal waste. And here's why it's important. Back in the day, our honorary chairman, Coburn, stood in the well of the Senate. He told the following story. He said, back in Oklahoma, I've delivered 4,000 babies. And on the law of large numbers, sometimes the delivery does not go as planned. And you know you have a problem when the baby's heartbeat, which is normally 130 to 140 beats a minute, falls to 50 or 60 beats a minute. Coburn said, at that moment, you have 3 minutes to make a decision. You have to make a decision. You have to act to save the life of the mother, to save the life of the baby. You can go to the forceps. You can go get the vacuum suction. You can leave labor and delivery, and you can do a C-section. But the point is, you have to decide, and you have to take action. And Coburn said, this is America's 3-minute moment. We have to make a decision. We have to take action. The federal deficit is the federal debt is $21.5 trillion. And what that means to all of us in the room, your share of it is $65,000. I've got a family of 5. My share of it in my household is $320,000. I can tell you that's never being paid back. And this is a transpartisan problem. At the start of the George W. Bush administration, the federal debt was $5.8 trillion. At the end of the Barack Obama administration, it was $19.9 trillion, and today it's $21.5 trillion. We need a war on waste. The federal government has no idea where their money's going. 20 largest agencies actually admitted in July that since 2004, on mistaken and improper payments, they have paid out $1.2 trillion. To put that in perspective, that's 2 years of Department of Defense full budget. 2 examples of the improper payments. The Department of Education, $11 billion of improper payments just over the course of the last 2 years. On student loans and overpaid Pell Grants, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, nearly $4 billion worth of improper payments and overpayments just in the last 2 years. Where's the pork? Well, every single year, equivalent to the military budget, federal agencies dole out $600 billion in grant making. And at openthebooks.com, we have found there is a grant for everybody. If you're a child in China, and if you want to learn how to cross your busy street, the American taxpayer paid $200,000 to create a virtual reality platform to teach Chinese kids how to cross the street. If you're a senior in a senior center just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, the American taxpayer paid $700,000 to teach the seniors Tai Chi. If you are a prostitute in California, the American taxpayer put $1.4 million into sex education for California prostitutes who could probably teach the class. And NASA's off mission. $2.5 million went to a cartoon called Space Racers for elementary school kids. And $9.2 million, you can fly your private plane into Martha's Vineyard because that little Shishi private airport got $9.2 million of our money. It's not only these small grants, like $1 million went to $1 million went to prepare religions for the discovery of extraterrestrial life. $1 million went to study where it hurts the most to be stung by a bee. And it's not just these small grants. Our elites have gamed the system for personal gain. We took a look at the 8 schools of the Ivy League over a 6-year period, and we found that they had received $22 billion worth of grants. And America's most successful corporations, the Fortune 100, they can't make the claim they need our money. We have given grants of $3.2 billion over the course of the last 3 fiscal years to companies in the Fortune 100 like Boeing, who had $100 billion worth of revenue and got $750 million worth of grant-making subsidies from you and I. And there's waste in the federal bureaucracy. Drain the swamp. We found that there are 30,000 federal bureaucrats that out-earn every governor of the 50 states. The average salary in 78 large federal agencies exceeds $100,000. It's $1.1 million a minute to $500 million a day that these bureaucrats cost us. But it's not only about the salaries. They get bonuses. Last year, $1.5 billion flowed to 1 million federal bureaucrats who got a bonus. And many people say, Adam, how could it be that 1 million federal bureaucrats got a bonus last year? They don't think government's running that well. Well, we took a look at that and found a government accountability audit from 2015, which said that they studied the issue, and 99.7% of all federal employees are rated highly successful. And that's impossible. The advertised purity of Ivory soap is only 99.6%. But they get paid time off. Can you imagine if you were running your company and if your employee hit their 3-year anniversary and you gave them 43 days of paid time off? 10 holidays, 13 sick days, and 20 vacation days? This isn't France. And I was called to the executive office of the president. I had a meeting with Office of Management and Budget. That's 8.5 weeks of paid time off. I pointed that out to them. They've gotten back to me, and I guess the president is serious about cutting that back to 6 weeks, which is still too much. But it would save the American taxpayer $6 billion a year, $60 billion over a 10-year period, because you need less full-time employees if people are actually working. We need a war on waste in this country at every level. And the last week of September shows us why. Use it or lose it spending. The federal budget year ends every year on September 30th. At openthebooks.com, on NPR and the Marketplace program, we showcase the fact that according to our data, 1 out of every $9 spent in the entire fiscal year last year was spent in the last week. And agencies went on binges. Like the State Department. They closed out their booze budget by spending $150,000 on whiskey. And they literally drove up taxpayer costs, these federal agencies. They spent $170 million in the last week on cars. And they engaged in a one-way arms race. They spent $400 million on guns, bombs, grenades, and other explosives. And the U.S. Army also had some fun. They closed out their fidget spinner budget by spending $7,000 on fidget spinners and $35,000 on an arcade machine and $62,000 on paddle boards and snowboards. And the VA even bought $20,000 in shuffleboards. Look, I want to invite all of you to join us in our nonpartisan war on waste. We need to open the books, raise our voice, and hold the politicians in both parties accountable for tax and spend decisions. And it's a daunting task. I understand it. We'll have to put our reputations on the line. But one person can make a difference. And this was deeply instilled in me in 2010 when I ran in the primary for governor of Illinois. On the Friday before the Tuesday election, one of the greatest champions of freedom and liberty flew in the 20th century, flew into Chicago to endorse my campaign for governor. And he's one of the co-founders of Solidarity. You know his name, Lech Wałęsa, the first president of Poland in the modern era, and the 1983 Nobel Peace Prize winner. And Wałęsa came in and he told the following story. He said, in the early days of Solidarity, nobody gave them a chance to to end communism on a peaceful basis. Influenza said the naysayers were correct. If you added up all the guns, the airplanes, the bullets, the bombs, nobody stood a chance against the communists. But he said the naysayers missed one important thing: principles. The men of women, the men of solidarity, the women of solidarity, they had stronger principles and they had stronger values. And we in this room, we have stronger principles and we have stronger values. We need to raise our voices, and as you know, when you raise your voices, when you fight, you win. Thank you for having me. Join the transparency revolution. Join our efforts at openthebooks.com.
Thank you, Adam. I've got a question over here. Just raise your hands, and I'll try to get to as many as we can.
I am also from Illinois. I love your accent. Thank you. I don't know if I missed it, but who pays you and who draws your eye to certain issues? Like who kind of tips you off on problems?
Right. So in terms of the funding of our organization, we're a private organization funded privately by private donors, foundations, regular people across the country, and we don't take any public money. So we've made a decision to keep our private donors private. And we advocate greater transparency in the public sector versus greater transparency in the private sector, where all of our information is already online. So we open the books on government. In terms of picking the tranches of oversight that we look at, look, everything's on the table. We take tips from everybody, and please come to openthebooks.com and send us those tips. We do have a capacity issue. Everything that I talked about has been done by 5 people. We have 33 full-time equivalents in our organization, and most of those people file and follow up on 60,000 Freedom of Information Act requests that we file every single year. So most of our budget goes toward data capture so everybody can use that data, and then we show folks how they can use the data left, right, and center in this country.
Got a question right here.
This is also sudden. I glanced at your webpage real quick this morning to see who you were. Have I read it right that the state of Arizona gave Boeing $940 million, something like that, or did I misread that?
So we do post the Arizona State checkbook at openthebooks.com. In the preparation for the talk, I did not look at it. So what I did look at is our mobile app. I wanted to see if we had the salaries from the city of Phoenix and from Maricopa County, and we do have those salaries in our app. I do believe that we have, in addition to the federal checkbook, where you can see all federal spending in your zip code or any zip code in a 50-mile radius or a zip code of your choosing, we're the only ones to display the federal checkbook in that app, where it means the most to you. You can see who received what from what federal agency. And I believe in terms of state of Arizona government spending, we also display that information at least on the website, if not in the mobile app. So if you're seeing in the state checkbook of Arizona that Boeing received that kind of bread, they did.
You were talking about discovering that a lot of money paid into Rahm Emanuel's campaign was for people who then got contracts from the government. Have you done that kind of an analysis of Arizona and its communities? So
on some of this, you'll just have to stay tuned. One of the things that we have done just recently, and it's not ready for public display yet, is we at openthebooks.com did a congressional scorecard on transparency of all members of the House of Representatives. And then we took a look at the federal grants flowing into their district, coupled up with those grant recipients then kicking back campaign cash or employing the member or the wife of the member or the member owning equity in that entity. And so we've come up with about 13 members of Congress that once we dot every I and cross every T, we think is going to be a pretty compelling story on why Congress needs more ethics. I don't think that one's going to be a tough sell.
My question is, I think it's good you're going around the country making speeches, but what is a practical thing that can happen to actually accomplish something?
So I think things are upside down right now. I think we have to go back to Ronald Reagan's parting speech to the country, where he reminded us that in America, the citizen is the driver of the car. You know that. They work for us. We've been busy with our families, our churches, our businesses, our communities, and we have trusted our elected officials to spend our tax dollars wisely. And when we open the books, the story is not a pretty story. So we have to, and this is why transparency is so powerful, we have to reorder the power relationship in this country. They work for us. We tell them how fast to drive the car, where to turn, when to apply the brakes, and when to stop. And this is my argument to you today, we are at that moment now.
So we have a basic problem, though, because our government is structured on elections, and elections are structured on money. So we know that anyone in the House of Representatives has to go across the street and dial for dollars in the senators. And you don't dial for dollars unless there's some kind of quid pro quo. So we have a whole structural issue. Isn't that the real problem?
I'm going to posit a different perspective with examples that any one of us can use, and I say we are called to use our rights as citizens to hold them accountable, and it's outside of elections. I just gave this speech in California, I give it in Illinois, across the country. The party in power, whether it's Wyoming or in California, they know how to win elections. Yes, Bernie Sanders, you were right, the system's rigged. Yes, Donald Trump, you were right, the system is rigged. They know how to win those elections. There is a structural problem to democracy with the elections and money. Our argument to you is something you can do outside of an election. It starts with, here's the model. It's the Coburn model. It starts with open data. When you review that, you'll have questions. Did Boeing get $1 billion from the state of Arizona? I don't know the answer to that, but if it's true, that's a question that needs to be answered. The question is why? Here's the second question. Show us in the law, where was the statutory authority to pay the money out? And you have to start in your local units, like I started at the College of DuPage, right? Ask questions and demand answers. Now, the demand of the answer will oftentimes necessitate networking up to 50 to 500. We were putting 500 people in those public meetings. That creates a media event. They're highly interested. That process squeezes out waste, fraud, corruption, and abuse regardless of party. In Illinois, there's a pair of retired military veterans that have used this model. In the last 4.5 years, 320 elected and public officials have fled their posts in the face of this transparency. So this is what I'm talking about. It has nothing to do with elections. We need to claim our rights. Has anyone ever tried to file a Freedom of Information Act request? Excellent. We saw some hands go up. You guys are engaged. Here's something to remember when you get a little static when you do that. You already own the information. Yes, we the people, if you're filing a request for emails or financial data or other things, we already own it. Remember, they work for us. You're following a statutory lawful practice just to take possession of information that we already own.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you very much. Those were great questions.
Thank you, Adam. That was a great presentation. A lot of eye-opening facts there. In fact, it reminds me, as I was telling you before, I'm from Illinois, so growing up as a kid in Illinois, I remember a politician there. He was a Secretary of State, and he was elected, re-elected forever, and his name was Paul Powell. And Paul Powell, when he died, and they were cleaning out his house, in his closet were stacks and stacks of shoeboxes. And inside the shoeboxes were cash and checks made out to Paul Powell, Secretary of State, in the amount of millions of dollars. So I certainly understand what you're talking about. So anyway, in appreciation of your participation in our program today, we've made a donation to one of our 4 selected charities this year, which is the Homeless Youth Connection. And thank you so much for being here. It was great having you.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed.